In an increasingly noisy market, even those brands with massive marketing budgets can struggle to stand out. Not only are companies trying to figure out where to get the most bang for their buck with paid advertising, there's also the challenge of social media, a channel that's become increasingly overwhelming. Finding the right strategies and figuring out who you need to execute them effectively can leave business leaders frustrated and prompts many to just give up. Is there a better way to rethink our marketing efforts so that they can work for us rather than against us? I'm Jane Singer, and it's great to have you here with us today on A Seat at the Table and as part of our international community of industry leaders. Today we're joined by Oren Greenberg, founder and fractional chief marketing officer of Kurve, a boutique digital marketing agency specializing in search marketing. Oren is a pragmatic and compassionate mentor helping mid-weight and senior marketers become the marketing leaders of tomorrow. He's worked in-house for 3 VC-backed ventures, generating over £1.3 billion in revenue. Oren splits his time between working with such leading companies as Canon, Investec Bank, Lenovo, and HomeServe, and supporting a number of the world's fastest scale-ups. In this episode, he'll be talking about tactics and strategies brands can use to stand out in a noisy, competitive market, how leaders can run competitive marketing campaigns without burning out their teams, and achieving rapid growth through proper and efficient utilization of internal teams. Good management is foundational to any successful business. However, finding the right management at the right time and in the right place can be daunting. That's why top corporations and even smaller enterprises rely on AsiaNet consultants to help fill key positions. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. So if you need to recruit new talent, or you think you might be doing that soon, head on over to their website. That's AsiaNetConsultants.com. AsiaNetConsultants.com. I'll also put a link in the show notes. Okay, now let's sit down with Oren and find out how we can 10x our marketing efforts. Oren, I am really delighted to have you on A Seat at the Table podcast. I think that what you're talking about today is really interesting to so many people because we're in an increasingly noisy market, and even those with massive budgets, right, are struggling to stand out. So, based on your experience, what should brands be looking to do? Do they need to be louder? Do they need to be more frequent? Do they need to be more outrageous? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily outrageous is right for every brand. It depends on the audience type. Some audiences respond better to outrageous. I think outrageous is like a very common consumer-based approach if you're like a young disruptor. But if you're selling to high net worth individuals, then being outrageous is the opposite of what you want to be aiming for. You want to be exclusive and subtle. So it's very prospect dependent. Frequency is definitely one of the key criteria associated with brand building in terms of what the research indicates. But I think the biggest and most meaningful lever is producing high quality content and focusing more on quality rather than frequency, definitely in the B2B context. For consumers, it's a bit different, where I think it does need to be, I wouldn't say it needs to be, I wouldn't use the word quality for consumer-facing businesses as much as I would use the word creativity. It needs to be more differentiated because it's noisier and louder. So B2B quality trumps, in B2C creativity and differentiation, which tends to lend to being more outrageous. But
Right.
It just needs to be more interesting, but once again, for that prospect type.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think some people are creative for the sake of being creative without considering what might resonate with that end user. Now, in your opinion, I mean, everyone wants to grow quickly, and I think that that's one of the biggest frustrations, right, that a lot of marketers have. In your opinion, I mean, how can brands better utilize their internal teams to achieve rapid growth?
Yeah, I think the reason they can't achieve rapid growth is not because of the teams, but because of poor systems and processes for repeatability. So scale is the symptom of a mechanism where the input is relatively small compared to the output. But with teams that's like people oriented is really tough to scale because there's people get ill, they get sick, they have different objectives, they get demotivated, they don't agree with what you said, or they'll perform it in a different way. But if you think about what pretty much all hyper growth businesses have in common today is they're all technology based businesses because tech scales well. Like the fact we're having this call on Zoom and you can have up to 50 people on a call on Zoom and they can handle, I don't know how many calls they do in a day, hundreds of thousands, maybe billions, maybe tens of millions of calls on Zoom. The technology is the enabler for the scale for that technology business. So for businesses, they need to streamline efficiency rather than maximize effectiveness from the existing teams in order to scale growth. Saying that, there is a type of team that is growth minded, a team who thinks like this: repeatability, systemizing, scaling. And you can find marketers who are growth oriented. A lot of marketers aren't growth oriented. They're much more qualitative. They're focusing more on how to get best quality and do less, but do it better and enjoy their work, enjoy their day to day, rather than a marketer who's thinking about building repeatable scaling loops for acquisition and growth. And they're happy to outsource or delegate, and they tend to be more scruffy. They're more about speed, they're more about data, they're more about insight led. So it's like a different culture and different mindset. So that's the two aspects I think quite critical for growth.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, everyone, like you said, is trying to implement technology wherever they can for all the reasons that you pointed out. But at what point, when you get out of a purely tech business, do you lose a certain personalization? I mean, do you feel that there's a certain, I don't know what you would say, sort of a line that you have to be careful not to cross?
I think it depends on what the business does, who the prospect is, and what the expectations that have been set are. Even though banks are obviously growing in digital adoption at an alarming rate, there's still banks with branches, and you're still going to the branches, and you're like, well, why? And the truth is, it's probably habit. Like people they want to talk to a person. That's what they've been doing for 30, 40 years. And suddenly for them to just start using a mobile app, it's not intuitive, it's not what they're expecting, it's not what they want. So that adoption curve is going to take time to adjust. Personalization fundamentally comes down to the value. If a customer will experience more value at higher speed and better quality at lower price, that's what's going to happen. And that's why people opted for Uber rather than their local taxi, because with the local taxi rank, they got to know the same drivers. But why did Uber explode? It's because people didn't really care as much about their local drivers as much as they cared about the cost and convenience of being able to get a driver anywhere, where they're at like 3 clicks of a button, rather than call the local taxi and have to wait an hour for Jim to become free from what he's currently doing. So the consumer, be B2B and B2C, opt for convenience and price over personal relationships. If they didn't, we wouldn't be having what we have now. We wouldn't be having international relationships to people that we've never met. We wouldn't be scaling at the rate that we're going. We'd still be as we were even 100 years ago, locally sourced, locally purchased, local relationships, tribal. That's not what people want. People want convenience and speed and flexibility and freedom of choice. So I don't think there is fundamentally a loss in personalization for the most part. And I say this having worked with everything, like high net worth individuals, high touch enterprise level businesses, mass market, B2C, SMEs. Like I've done a lot, I've worked with probably 16 industries now with different varying propositions of high value, low value, high touch, low touch. And that's pretty much, I'd say, a trend across everyone. It's about what the prospect and the consumer and the buyer want. It will define their tolerance and what they're willing to give up in order to get.
Right. So if I'm understanding you correctly, then it's a sliding scale, and you have to know where that sweet spot is for your customer, how much they're willing to trade off on that personalization, on that personal service, so to speak, in order to get something that's cheaper and potentially faster. and there's a whole range, and you just need to find out for your customer where that spot is. Is that correct?
Yes, I think a lot of it comes down to also transparency.
Okay.
What happens with relationship-driven options, they're more opaque. And then what technology has enabled, and you see this a lot with a great example is like FX. So businesses have to transfer money from country A to country B. And typically you'd call up your broker at the bank and they'd give you a deal and you don't know what their margin is. And you'd have your guy and you'd call him up, and that's how it used to be. And now you go online, you get your rate immediately, you click 3 buttons, you do it then and then whenever you want. And the CFOs and the FDs, even though they're doing huge volumes of money, like tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and transfers, and there's a risk involved that's scary, they now still prefer to go through a digital mechanism. Not all of them, maybe 8 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10, but definitely the majority. Otherwise, those tools and systems that I've seen being put in place that do this wouldn't be so successful as they are, and the adoption rate for them is very rapid.
Right. Now, I think one of the things that most brands face sooner or later is trying to come up with innovative solutions to marketing challenges. What's your approach to that?
So when you ask my approach, you mean how I come up with innovative solutions for marketing challenges for businesses that I support?
Yes. So you have a client and they have a market challenge, and you're thinking, well, what can we do here? How might you approach that?
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty proven mechanism, a template, which almost always consists of gap analysis, identifying what the market currently looks like. And that's in every aspect of marketing. If it's what are the creatives that competitors are using and how do we differentiate? Or if it's the content, if we have to go do guest blog posts, what is the content that hasn't been written about? Or if it's the SEO keywords, whether the SEO keywords that have the highest volume with the lowest competition that we can target. So that's applicable. I'm just giving you 3 examples applicable to every area of marketing. And that's the first step. The second step is pretty much an ideation process of trying to create the most amount of ideas to be able to pick the best ones. And then the next step is picking the top 3 to 5 and testing those out. So there has to be an experimentation methodology to getting data to validating. But that's pretty much the process for innovation. There is no available alternative that I know of other than viable experimentation that needs to be based on some sort of meaningful insight.
Okay. Now, you talk about avoiding team burnout. I mean, that's something we don't often discuss, but it's something that's very real, particularly nowadays when it seems that teams are really, really being challenged to produce more content, to be more innovative, to be faster, to get, bigger results. How can we execute market strategies successfully, but without overstretching our teams? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I think this is about having proper management hygiene in place. So there's a lot of layers to effective team management. So, maintaining your one-on-ones, the one-on-one meeting structure with your team member to understand where they're at, how they're feeling, and then the way commercial objectives are translated into activity and prioritizing those correctly and effectively, and effective project management and delegation. So proper briefs, proper descriptions, proper follow-up, proper support, proper mentorship, proper training. So there isn't like one silver bullet that is an answer to how to avoid burnout. But burnout is, from what I've observed, it's got 2 components. It's got an internal capacity and an external force. And because different people can experience the same level of pressure, and one burns out and one doesn't, right? So it's not like everyone burns out if you apply enough force. So the question really is how do you calibrate it with the different people? But fundamentally, there's internal resources and external resources. And internal resources are, your relationship and the communication and the trust and the emotions and mentoring and coaching and all the tools a manager has in their arsenal to support their team. The external is what I meant about company culture and about prioritization, product management, strategic clarity, planning effectively. But fundamentally, it's a sum of all of those parts that if some of them are out of sync, will create burnout. It's the excess intensity. I think a lot of burnout tends to come from ambiguity. Ambiguity creates fear and uncertainty, and it's the fear and uncertainty that leads to excess action. And it's the excess action that drains resources, time, energy, attention. And then the person starts to develop unhealthy habits, like going to sleep late, drinking too much coffee, and then not having enough relaxation exercises. The nervous system is overstimulated. Instead of activating the autonomous nervous system, the central nervous system is hyper. Too many thoughts, and then the excess thoughts have a negative skew. They have a negative tone to them, and then that creates a snowball effect. And that snowball effect at one point creates this effect of burnout, which is exhaustion, irritability, etc. So I think it's a big scale. We're overwhelmed with the amount of information available to us. We're overwhelmed with how many different tools we have to communicate. It's like Slack, WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, etc., etc. And we're not able to self-regulate well enough for the amount of dopamine and cortisol that's getting released from the overwhelm of the volume that we're facing. And it's the internal lack of self-regulation that's actually fundamentally the primary mechanism that's causing burnout, in my opinion, from what I've observed.
I think that's a really interesting analysis, and I'm very happy that you brought that up because I think that's absolutely true. People are overwhelmed. We've made it too complicated. As you're saying, there's just too many different channels of communication. People are trying to do too many things at once, and I think you're right. Many jobs are not specced out, or not very clearly. So you're right. People end up wasting a lot of time doing a lot of things that they don't need to do just to make sure that they haven't missed anything. So I think that is a very, very important framework that all of us can consider.
Yes, I think there's other points as well. I think nowadays, because of this short-term culture that we live in, where everything's at a touch of a button, there is less endurance for longer-term projects or longer-term activities that can actually have a more meaningful impact. And it's not that people don't initiate them, they do, but the abandonment rate is really high. So what happens is if you're working on a 6-month project and a month before you get pulled from it, the motivation is going to plummet because you don't have anything to show. And when you're going to the next job interview, or even internally, when people say, what have you delivered? And then when it comes to your bonus negotiation or salary negotiation, and you need to try and validate or prove that you've delivered value to the organization in order to get remunerated, because everyone wants to be growing, everyone wants to be making more money, then you can't because someone else pulled the project from you. And that creates a lot of frustration. So I've seen burnout happen just because people really want and need a sense of growth and the success. We have to get those wins. And if that's really hard to do, which in the larger the organization, the more complex it is, the harder it is to do this. And I've seen that happen a lot. I've seen projects of tens of millions and 100 million just burned to the ground, just purely down to a change of strategy because there's a new stakeholder and they're like, well, why are we putting 100 million into this? This doesn't make any sense. Cut all of it. That was a waste of money. But then all the people, the 480 people in the 100 mil category are let go, and everything they'd worked on for like 3 years just gone down the drain, right? So I've seen that happen, which is quite interesting. And then, their self-esteem and so forth plummets because they feel a sense of failure. All the hard work has come to null. So I think self-esteem is like a really critical component that leads to happiness and satisfaction in our day-to-day. That's not fully taken into account within the context of commercial and business decisions. But it was just funny because all the organizations are, we're a people-first organization. Our organization is all about culture. We're all about people. Like everyone you speak to, that's what they say. It's like, why did you make the decision? It didn't make any commercial sense. What was the impact on your team? Oh, devastating. So what did you do? Oh, we still made the commercial decision. It's a business after all.
Right.
Like, oh, what about that whole thing about being people first? And it's like, oh, so you're not people first. It's really about the profit. It's really about the money. And this is actually not necessarily true. And it's very easy to turn them into binary, or to make the argument like I'm making. But actually, the challenge is how you align them. How do you get the commercial to work with the people, and for that to be symbiotic and work towards the same goal? And that's really hard. And there's no simple or easy ways to resolve this other than great company culture and right processes and systems and priorities and planning and clarity and risk assessment and diligence and collaboration and having the right people doing the right function. So there's a lot of moving parts to getting it right, which is why it's so difficult.
Yeah, I completely hear you. And as you're saying this, I'm just thinking to myself how true it is, because you're right. The sense of satisfaction is such a big part of what people get out of a job. I mean, we tend to think about it really from commercial terms. If you're a company, is it profitable? If you're an employee, am I getting paid to do it? But you're right, that sense of satisfaction really plays a huge role. And it is, you're right. I can, as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking of so many different examples. Now, what role do you see using third-party providers, or I don't know if you want to call them freelancers or contractors, as part of a team?
Yeah, I mean, I primarily work as a fractional CMO, so I'm technically a consultant/freelancer. I have been for a long time, so I'm clearly biased. I think organizations nowadays, they have a hybrid setup, the most successful ones, where you spin out either things that you don't need because they're just not required, because there's not enough budget to spend on that channel, or you don't really need enough design work done. So that fractional or freelance is it's more cost effective to pay a premium for that, for what you do need, rather than pay cheaper for full-time resource that you don't actually need a lot of the time. So I think that's the primary functional utility. I also think dipping into specialist skills that you don't have in-house, that you can't afford to hire, because everyone would love to have a Google ad specialist, a Facebook ad specialist, an Instagram ad specialist, etc., etc. But the reality is you can't afford to pay a full-time salary for each channel specialist for all the different areas. So you end up with marketing generalists, and the majority of marketers are generalists, 60 to 70%. So you need to have deep expertise, and you can't develop that in-house. And I speak to marketers who think they can, and then they fail, and they just underestimated the complexity or depth of Google ads or Facebook ads or some sort of specialist marketing function. So I think freelancers will always have a place. I think it's interesting how it's an increasing economy. I think more and more people want to have flexible working hours, working from different locations. I'm actually seeing that across clients, that people are less likely to take on a role if they don't have that criteria met. They want and need more flexibility in their work. And freelance work tends to accommodate that a lot more. And so that's why I think there is an increase in people going freelance. But I remember I was doing the numbers, and actually it's still a staggeringly low amount. I think the majority of people are still full-time employed. There's still, I think that will progressively grow, but it's still a relatively small percentage as a whole, surprisingly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it gets a lot more publicity than the actual headcount, because it is tough to be working in a fractional role, because you have to keep looking for those jobs. I mean, people sort of glamorize it when you hear people talk about it, but they forget that you need to be doing the work, but at the same time, you also need to be looking for the next gig. So it has its challenges as well.
I think that's one key component, which is true. The fact you're starting to do marketing and biz dev yourself, so you're now no longer really a freelancer, you're actually a small business owner, and you have a learning curve. But there's also other aspects of running a small business, like finance and admin, which you didn't take into account going freelance. There's additional complexity. But I'd say the biggest factor that is mostly underestimated is trust. When you're sitting in someone's office and you're building rapport with them physically, it's much more advantageous than if you're remote and they can't get a feel for you. They can't build a relationship with you. They can't go deeper. They can't get a sense for you, where you're at, what you're feeling. on what you're doing. So that's another key part that I think freelancers underestimate. They hyper focus on the output of the skill and under focus of value on the relationship, which is pretty much how people buy, right? People are buying because all the skills are commoditized. Like we can all go to like an Upwork and get any skill.
Right.
But no one does that. You're like, well, why? Because I don't know what I'm buying. I don't know who they are. And even though they have ratings, it's very hard to do. We've all had bad experiences in doing it because that's not necessarily related to the quality of the output I'm going to get. And so relationships play a very big part in that. And people, I think freelancers then underestimate it.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. It really, you need that flywheel and you need that ongoing system to build the relationship, maintain the relationship, and be able to create that relationship with many, many different potential clients. So you're right. It's really, you're not just a freelancer. You're actually, as you point out quite correctly, you're really running a mini business on your own. Now,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, now you've worked with such a wide range of clients. What's the key thing, or maybe there's more than one thing, that you've learned from all of this? I mean, there's probably something that you said, wow, this is something I didn't know going in, or having seen so much of this is a commonality that I see, either what people are doing right or perhaps where they may not be doing as well as they could be.
Yeah, I've had so many variable experiences. It's very hard to find a consistent thread.
Okay.
The first thought that came to mind when you asked that was, it's just bloody hard.
Yes.
It's really hard. Yeah, the only thing consistent across all of it is people have an expectation that the grass is greener, but actually it's not that simple. It's just all really, it's just as hard as like, becoming a world champion in planking. Like,
right.
If you think about the average plank, like 1 or 2 minutes, and then you go, okay, what's the champion? It's like in the hours. And it's like that level of tenacity that is required of focus and dedication to become really, really good, to get what people really, really want, which is the freedom, the success, the reputation, the recognition, the status. It's actually really hard because it's very competitive. And then I'd say the people who are the most successful, they're like all in. They are fully immersed. Their identity is deeply wrapped up in what they do to an extreme. And they tend to be extreme characters or extreme personalities. And the ones who tend to be unsuccessful or average tend to be more relaxed and chilled out.
Right.
Probably more pleasant to work with.
Right.
But they're just not exceptional. Yeah. So unfortunately, being exceptional, you pay a heavy toll. This is very different than like the 4-hour work week. This is what I was saying is very like not vogue. It's not easy. It's not simple. And I think people buy into get rich schemes because they want simple. They want easy because life's hard enough anyway.
Right.
Unfortunately, having worked with some of the most smartest people, most successful people, wealthiest people in varying organizations, different sizes, and lots of different projects, I'd say that's pretty consistent.
I completely agree with you on that. It's funny because you do hear these myths being bandied about, right? About the 4-hour work week, about all these different ways to get rich or to be able to not have to work a lot and still be able to live the good life. But then, like you're saying, anybody who you really know up close and personal, or you've had a chance to sit down with, who actually is successful, you'll find that it's exactly what you're saying. It's a heck of a lot of work, and it's ongoing work. It's not easy at all. Well, Oren, you've shared so many interesting things here. How can people connect with you? Where can we find you?
Sure. So I've got 2 primary streams. One is TikTok, which I'm pretty active on, and the second is LinkedIn. And they're different types of content.
Right.
And LinkedIn is written form, and TikTok is video, and it's kind of lighter and more around leadership and management for marketers. So yeah, either channel or both channels. Happy to connect up.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to include your links in the show notes so that people will be able to connect with you. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today on A Seat at the Table.
Oh, real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. A big shout out to our sponsor, AsiaNet Consultants. AsiaNet is a specialist in recruiting top talent in Asian markets. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. To learn more about how AsiaNet consultants can help you find the best talent, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. That's asianetconsultants.com. Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. And check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the episodes of A Seat at the Table and Launch to Legendary. That's seatpodcast.com, SEAT podcast.com. And if there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me here today and being part of our professional community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast.